When you have 4 boys, and you're their dad, sometimes they can get a little cocky. And sometimes I get a little cocky back. Well, a while ago, one of them was going hiking. And he kind of threw out the whole idea that, hey, Dad, I don't know if you would be able to keep up. And I said, I can out-hike you any day. His friend was there, and she said, that's a bold statement. And of course, she was looking at me, being old, and looking at him, being young and in shape. Sometimes I forget that the years have slowed me down. Sometimes I still think that I'm in my 20s. And so I get a little cocky. Long time ago, I heard a pastor speak, and he was talking about taking a run with his son. And he still was a big runner, used to be a big runner, and especially he was good for his age. And so his son said, let's take a run, Dad. And he said, okay, let's see what you have, son. And he said his son burst out of the starting block like the stallion he was, but his old man kept up with him. And he said by the halfway point, I was almost out of breath, but I was still right behind my son. Then my son began to slow down. So even though this was just a run, I decided to take the lead, he said. And I did. And then my son, as I passed my son, he said, I was breathing tremendously. I was sweating tremendously. And as I passed him by, I noticed he was barely breathing. As we finished the race, run, he said, I was out of breath. I was sweating up a storm, and I looked over at my son. He was barely out of breath and barely sweating. He said, good run, Dad. You still have it. It was then I realized he'd slowed down for me to let me win the run. And he said that was strength under control. I realized he could have easily left me in the dust, but he chose to let me win instead. That was strength under control, he said, and I realized I finished first because he let me. Strength under control is a very powerful thing. We read the 3rd beatitude, and Jesus makes what seems to be a silly statement. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I don't think so, Jesus. Not on the earth that we live in. This is a dog-eat-dog world, right? Survival of the fittest. The early bird gets the worm. We have to get out there. We have to be strong. We have to run hard. We have to win. 100% all the time. The only thing the meek get is left behind. These Beatitudes aren't getting any easier, are they? Blessed are the poor in spirit. It was the first one we talked about. People whose hearts are desperate for God. Blessed are those who mourn. That was last week. People whose hearts are broken over sin, their own sin, and the world. We understand these first two a little bit better, but that doesn't make them any easier. A lot of us, we want to be like Jesus. We really do. And we try harder. We grit our teeth. We want so much to be like him. And then we fall down. And and sometimes we feel like a failure. We want to be like him from the inside out. We want to think, we want to feel, we want to desire the way he thought, he felt, he desired. But these things, they don't come easy to us. Desperation, brokenness, and now meekness. Are you kidding us, Jesus? Remember, these Beatitudes, they're all about asking God for a change of heart. And as we take a closer look at this particular Beatitude, it reveals a lot to us about the heart of Jesus, about the change that he wants to even work in our hearts. Blessed are the meek. Meek sounds an awful lot like weak, doesn't it? Imagine going for a job interview, and the hiring manager is talking with you and interviewing, and he says, "What's your best quality?" And you say, "Well, my best quality is I'm meek." You think you're getting the job? You're getting the front door. Thank you for coming in for the interview, young man. There's the front door. We'll call you. Remember, the Beatitudes are tough. And being meek isn't likely to get you a job. How in the world is it going to get you the earth? And what does it mean to inherit the earth? That makes no sense. What does the word meek mean exactly? Surprisingly, it doesn't mean weak, or timid, or indecisive, or easygoing. Outwardly, it's like gentleness. And it implies a sensitivity, a kindness, especially in dealing with other people. Inwardly, it's like humility, in that it involves an honest estimate, an honest assessment of ourselves in relationship to God and to others. Someone described meekness as this: a controlled desire to see others' interests advance ahead of one's own. Controlled is an interesting word. Because in the Greek language, the word meek is sometimes used to describe a wild animal that has been tamed. The animal's strength is still there, but it's under control. Think about a horse, a stallion. If you look at them, they are such powerful beasts. I mean, they walk and their muscles just ripple. They're scary and they're dangerous when they're wild. I don't know. I've never encountered a wild horse, but I've seen them on TV. And what I do know is that those people that know horses, those wild horses that are not yet broken, are scary and dangerous. But once they've been broken in, they are under control. And listen, they become submissive to the will of their master. So meekness can be defined as strength under control. A meek horse isn't weak, just as a meek person isn't weak. On the contrary, a meek person knows his or her strength, but is able to restrain it in the interests of the master and others. When the Bible uses the word meek, it always springs from trust. A person who trusts God to meet their needs they don't have to strive, they don't have to scheme, they don't have to demand what they want, they don't have to yell to have their needs be met. People often point at Abraham as an example of meekness. When he allowed his nephew Lot, they decided to split up and go their own way. And he said, "Lot, you have first choice of all the land that's been divided up." And as the leader of the clan, Abraham had every right to choose the very best land to be his. But he didn't. Abraham was able to yield his right to choose because he trusted that God would provide no matter what the situation and no matter what land he ended up with. So he gave Lot the first choice. We tend to think of meekness as something we show toward others, but it begins with our attitude toward God. A meek person knows that his needs or her needs and their future are in God's hands. So they don't need to compete with other people to get what they want, what they think they need, or what they think is fair. Meekness means yielding your agenda to God and others. You should probably write that down. Meekness means yielding your agenda to God and to others. Do you feel frustrated with what's going on in our country? Yes. Me too. Are you angry about what's happening today? Me too. With COVID, with our politics, I get it. I'm right there with you. But God is still under control, isn't He? And we need to imitate Jesus. That's what we're told to do. And He said, I'm meek, not weak. He was strength under control. He drew the picture of it. Our natural inclination in probably each one of us is to press our agenda, to demand our rights, to get the upper hand, and to do it before anyone else does. The world, it seems to reward people that live that way. You got to have it, you got to have it now spirit, that mentality. It shows up specifically in our need to control things in our life. And maybe to control people in our life. You know anyone like that? People who try to manage their anxiety by managing people and the events around them. We call them control freaks. Some of us. Bosses who micromanage, helicopter parents. You know, those people that they swoop down and they oversee every detail, every moment of their children's lives. Husbands and wives who bully and manipulate their spouse to get what they want. All of it is probably driven by fear. Fear that my needs might not be met. Fear that someone else might get ahead of me. Fear that I might miss a big chance in my life. So we press, we strive, and we are filled with anxiety. We fret. We grasp at what we want out of life. Meek and humble in heart. Here comes Jesus with this beatitude. In the midst of all of this, blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who give way, who let go, who yield their agenda to God and to others. This wasn't just an off-the-cuff saying from Jesus. And He develops it more fully later on in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. She had no idea what I was talking about. Jesus says, after touring the towns of Capernaum and Bethesda, and He sees these people's great lack of faith, the absence of peace in their lives, and this is what He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Doesn't that sound good? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle. That means meek. I am meek and humble in heart, and you will find rests for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Doesn't that sound like a better way to live? Do you ever feel burdened by your to-do list? Some of us live by a to-do list. And I'm not knocking a to-do list, but some of us allow the list to drive us. Don't you wish you could slow down and rest a little bit? Jesus is inviting us to learn a new way of living, a way that he introduced himself. And once again, we discover that Jesus didn't just teach the Beatitudes, Jesus lived the Beatitudes. Dependence on God, brokenness over sin, and now meekness toward God and others were attributes of his own heart. Jesus demonstrated meekness. Think about it. He was meek when he rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. He could have ridden in on a stallion. He was king after all. He knew he was king. He had the power of the king. And for once, people would have known it. He had every right to enjoy that moment, to enter into Jerusalem sort of with majesty on the back of a stallion. But what did he do? He came in riding on the back of a donkey. Meek. He demonstrated it in the upper room, when no one seemed willing to do the menial, unpleasant task of washing each other's feet. That's a servant's job. Jesus was the rabbi. He was the teacher. He was the guest of honor. He had every right to expect someone to minister to him that evening, especially what he knows was going to happen. All he had to do was say the word, and probably one of those disciples would have jumped to the task. Instead, knowing who he was, Scripture says that Jesus stood up, wrapped a towel around his waist, rolled up his sleeves, and washed the dust and the grit off of each of the disciples' feet. Can you imagine how humbling that must have been to them? Meek. How about the Olive Grove, when the temple guards came to arrest him? Did they really think they could take him out with their puny swords? And he stood up when they asked, "Where is Jesus?" And he said, "I am he." I mean, this is the Son of God. His words alone could have knocked them out. But he kept his strength in check. Even when one of his disciples, probably Peter, took a sword and cut the ear off of the first guard into the olive grove, Jesus took the ear and put it back on. And he said, "Put away the sword." He chose to go quietly, without a fight. Meek. When he was falsely accused, he could have defended himself very easily. When he was unjustly sentenced, he had every right to demand a fair trial, which he didn't get. When he hung on the cross, he could have easily summoned a legion of angels to come and take him down and minister to him. But he chose to hang there. He could have, but he didn't. 1 Peter 12:23, it tells us, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Jesus yielded to people that were wicked, to unfair treatment, in order to hang on the cross and die for the sins of the world, yours and mine. And he did that in accordance with the Father's will. Earlier in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "Lord, If you can take this from me, take it. And then he said, but not my will, Father, but your will be done. It takes you and I preparation to get there, at that place of surrender. But that's where meekness begins. That's where gentleness begins, with a surrendered heart. When we trust Jesus with our deepest needs, when we come to a place where we don't have to demand our rights, when we don't have to assert our preferences, when we don't have to control people or circumstances, when we yield to God, say, not my will, Lord, yours be done in my life. Surrender's tough. Knowing that our lives are in His hands should be enough. But we have this worldly mentality. And so sometimes we take things back. Because He's not doing it quick enough for us. In God we trust. Isn't that what we have written on all our money? Surrendering God and to God does not come easy to us. We say we trust God. We say we do. It flows off the tongue very easily. But we feel that we need to speak our mind. We need to demand our rights. And those things are not necessarily wrong. If they're backed by a trust in God. David, he talks to this tension that we struggle with in Psalm 37. He says, do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Fretting is what we do when our plans don't seem to be working out. At least the way that we plan them. When the real estate market heads south, and you had your home up for sale. And life or success or happiness kind of seems to be elusive or passing you by. Envy. Envy is what we feel when other people get promoted and we don't. In my job, the other instructors got new cars. I still got one with 180,000 miles on it. Come on, boss. What's with that? You know, when you were little, it was somebody else made the team and you didn't. And kicks in. Or maybe as parents, when their kids seem to be doing better than your kids. And when we feel that way, we begin to press, we begin to control. Even to the point where we compromise our convictions. Because we're not sure that God is going to come through for us. But all that fretting, all that striving, it only serves to make us and other people more miserable and more anxious. How much better David learns to leave matters in God's hands, to trust God's good purposes for his life, to let things come to him in God's time and not David's time. He says this, commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. Tim, be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. In a short story entitled Much Land, Leo Tolstoy, he talks about a Russian peasant named Feynman, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, who dreams of having more land. And even though he's able to provide a decent living for himself and his family, he sees other people with more land and he desires it, he wants it. and is convinced that if he had more land, his family would be happy and they'd be secure and life would be great. So one day he happens to come upon some landowners that are offering to sell him for 1,000 rubles, which I don't exactly know how much it is. It's not a lot. They say, we'll sell you as much land as you can cover in a day. All you have to do is walk across the land with a spade, and you have to dig holes to mark your claim. The only stipulation was that he had to be back to the very spot he started by the time that the sun went down. Or he loses the land and he loses the money. So Pham, he starts off really fast, quickly. He's moving at a record pace, and he's staking off his claim. And the day gets hot, he stops for a moment, he gets a drink, but he knows that every stop costs him more land. So he keeps moving, and he wants to rest, he wants to sit down, but he's scared that he'll fall asleep, or he'll doze off, or forget that he's on a quest here. So he just keeps himself moving, and he gets farther and farther and farther from his starting point. And then suddenly he realizes, as the sun is starting to go down, that, wow, I'm a long ways off here. So he starts to run now. And he starts to run, and he because he's determined that I got to get back in time. And he's running, and he's running, and he's running, and he's exhausted now. He's sweating, he even drops his food and his water, even some of his clothes, so that he can run faster and lighten his load. And finally he gets to the place where his starting point is in sight. And right now he's pushing himself, and he can see the sun going down on the horizon, and with every ounce of strength he is running, he is pushing himself faster. His heart is pounding in the chest. You know how it is when you're running really, really hard. He's gasping for air, and just as the last curve of the sun slips down, he reaches the mark where he began, and he collapses in exhaustion. And the crowd cheers. They're thrilled. He made it. But then the servant goes over to him and tries to get him to his feet. And he realizes that Pham has died. He had a heart attack. And the final line of the story reads like this. His servant picked up the spade and dug a grave long enough for Pham to lie in it, then buried him in it. 6 feet from his head to his heels was all the land he needed. If only Pham had listened to Psalm 37. Do not fret, it only leads to evil, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. Meekness doesn't mean you have to take every promotion that's offered to you. You don't have to buy up simply because you can. You don't have to get into the right school. You don't have to win every argument. You don't always have to be right. You don't have to have it your way. You don't have to compromise your faith and your values to get what you think you need to have. 6 feet was all the land he needed. How much land do you need? How much wealth? How much recognition? How much do you have to be right all the time? What's it going to cost you to get it? Blessed are the meek, Jesus said, for they will inherit the earth. Those who are willing to surrender their needs and their dreams and their fears to God. Meekness is having hands that are extended toward God instead of grasping after these lesser things. Hands that are open to receive whatever God gives, instead of closing in and clinging so tightly to what we think we need. Meekness also means that we're gentle with other people, not demanding our way, not having to be right. I'm not saying you compromise what you believe. I'm not saying that at all. We never do that. But be gentle with people in spite of the fact that you disagree with them. A gentle answer turns away wrath. A meek answer turns away wrath. That's what we're told. Taylor University, a college, a Christian college in Indiana. Some of you know of Taylor. Years ago, they were pleased to learn that they had an African student, Sam, who was going to enroll in their school. And they were pretty thrilled about it. This was before it was commonplace for international students to come to the U.S. to study. And he was a very bright young guy. He had great promise. The school felt very honored that he chose them and that he was coming to them. And when he arrived on the campus, the president of the university, of course, met him and spoke with him and took him on a tour of the campus. He showed him all the dorms, all the rooms. And then he said, "Sam, where would you like to live?" And the young man, Sam, he said, "If there is a room that no one wants, give that room to me." The president said he turned away in tears. Over the years, he had welcomed thousands and thousands of Christian men and women onto that campus, and he said, never, ever did anyone make a statement like that, a request like that. If there's a room that no one wants, give that room to me. That's meekness. That's gentleness. If there's a job that no one wants, I'll do that job. If there's a kid that no one wants to eat lunch with, I'll eat with that kid. If there's a piece of toast that's burnt, give that one to me. If there's a person that's hard to work with, I'll work with them. If there's not enough dinner, you can have mine. I'll make peanut butter and jelly. If there's a sacrifice someone needs to make, I'll make that sacrifice. Understand that a meek person doesn't do it out of guilt or under compulsion or in the spirit of martyrdom. They do it because they're confident that their Heavenly Father knows what they need and that He grants the desires of the hearts that are surrendered to Him. That kind of meekness, that kind of gentleness, it doesn't come naturally to us. Not only because we are upward, mobile suburbanites living in Westchester County, but because we're fallen human beings, and we have, just as Tim was saying, we have this problem with sin. It doesn't come naturally to most of us. I know that I have enough type A blood in my veins to know about being anxious and fretting and striving. That's why I need a change of heart. That's why it has to be a work of the Spirit in me. The Apostle Paul, he said, "For the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness," or gentleness, and self-control. That's why we need to take Jesus' yoke upon us and learn from Him, because He is meek, He is gentle, He says, lowly of heart. I wonder if we were gentle, if we adopted that into our lives, if we focused on it. I wonder how many arguments we would avoid if we were gentle. Instead of demanding our way, instead of proving our point. How many heartaches would we avoid if we could just be gentle and listen instead of yelling to prove that we're right? It says, inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Notice Jesus didn't say they will inherit the world. He's not referring to things like wealth or fame or comfort, things that our world tells us we have to have. He says they will inherit the earth. The Bible tells us that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The earth includes all the good things that God has made, the good gifts that He offers His children, like beauty, meaning, love, significance. The earth represents the goodness and the fullness of God, both in this life and, again, as Tim talked about, the life to come in Revelation. Remember, the Beatitudes were more about being than doing. And I thought about it, well, what do you have to do? You inherit the earth. What do you have to do to inherit something? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, some people might wish that Uncle Leo would kick off already. And maybe they're trying to get themselves into Uncle Leo's good graces before he does that so they can get themselves some inheritance. But the only way to inherit something is to be in a right relationship with the person that owns it. So the only way to inherit the earth is to surrender to the one that owns it. You know, God always gives the best to His kids. In mission work, or the pastorate, you don't get rich. I mean, I'm sure there's some guys that do. We see them on TV, maybe radio. But for the most of us, we don't go into this for the money. I knew going into this profession that I wouldn't be great making the big bucks. Again, some of us probably do, some of us probably don't even realize it, but we just are surrendered to God, and we just said, I know you want me to do this, so I'll go and I'll walk in it. But we know it's not the money trick. I had an old friend, I've told this story before in a different way, but he was an old friend, he was retiring from being a pastor, and we had a celebration for his retirement. Norm. And I happened to go back into the sanctuary after the celebration was over that afternoon, and I left my Bible or something there. And I walked up and grabbed my Bible, and as I was walking back, there was Norm sitting in the back of an empty sanctuary by himself, looking sad. And I went by and I said, again, congratulations, Norm. You know, I wish you the best. It must be great. I said, but you don't look too happy. And he looked at me and he said, Dave, he goes, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have 6 months to exit the parsonage. I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't have money saved up. I don't know what I'm going to do. He knew a mutual friend that we both had. Her name was Martha. Martha was an only child. She never got married. She did adopt 2 children. But she had been a public school teacher for some 40 years, and she had a nice pension, plus a house in Cortland Manor, one in Florida, and a cottage in Canyon. The last 2 she inherited from her parents. She found out that Norm had nowhere to go. Next thing you know, she's offering him to live at her house in Florida, rent-free, just pay any bills that incurred. Norm and his wife got to live in this beautiful community in sunny Florida, but it also helped Martha because she now had a caretaker of the house that she rarely went to. It was a win-win scenario. God gives the best to those that leave the choice to him. Years later, Martha died suddenly in her sleep. And I'll tell you what, if I got to go, that's exactly the way I want to go. Actually, Margaret, who was close with her, was one of the people that found her in the bed that afternoon. She had just beaten cancer. She was in pretty good shape. But God took her. Margaret and I were both stunned and heartbroken. She was our friend. We were more stunned when it came to the reading of her will and found out that she had left us a cottage in Canada, right on a beautiful lake. So for some 8 or 9 years, we took vacations there every summer. It came complete with docks and boats. My kids learned how to swim there, water ski, fish, scuba dive, and just relax. And we have so many great memories. We sold it because of taxes and expense, but that money, that has helped us supply the need that we had at the time. And to this day, if you ask one of my kids about vacations, if you ask them, do you miss Canada? Every one of them would say, yeah, a lot. Martha left that to us for a reason. She knew that's what we needed. We inherited those blessings because of her. Because they were hers to give. So she did. Norm became a pastor and surrendered to God his talents, his career, his material needs, even his retirement. And instead of chasing this abundant worldly life, he waited for God to bring them to him. He had a better retirement than most of us will ever have. It wasn't saying that he didn't have moments where he was a bit scared. But he discovered God always gives what's best to those who leave the choice to him. God had a servant named Martha who surrendered to him and who lived to serve him. And he gave her and he blessed her so that she could give and bless others in return. And she did, because it was hers to give. And those blessings are going to carry on. Every one of my kids receive them. Maybe there's something in particular in your life that you need to surrender to God. Something you've been holding on to, something you've been trying to control. A dream, fear, a relationship, a material thing. Maybe you need to surrender your whole to-do list to God. That could be a tough thing for some people. There's nothing wrong with having those lists. It's what we do with the list that makes the difference. We can clutch it in our fist, we can check the things off one by one, or we can give it to God and say, not my will, but your will be done, Lord. Maybe you've never prayed for God to work on your gentleness, especially in regards to other people. I know I've been challenged with this thought this week. To be gentler with people. I'm not always. Maybe it's a good time for some of us to ask the Lord to do some heart surgery on us. Jesus was meek, not weak. And as we celebrate the cross, we're reminded of that fact each and every week. He didn't have to die. what he chose to for us. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Let's close in a word of prayer before we celebrate communion together. Father, we just thank you for your word. And I pray, Father, that you would do heart surgery on us, that you would make us meek, gentle in heart. Not only with our agendas, but especially with other people, Father. Help us to follow your example. In Jesus' name, amen. Maybe we can have a couple people come up and distribute the elements.